Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city. Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city. And we start. Steve woke up at 6:45 am to the sound of his alarm clock, sharp, insistent, as if it were testing his grip on his routine every day. Sparrows chirped outside the window, and the faint morning light filtered through the cracks in the blinds, drawing thin stripes on the wood floor of their suburban Chicago bedroom. He stretched, feeling the joints in his shoulders crunch, and habitually extended his hand to the left side of the bed. Empty. The cold sheet reminded him that Amanda had flown to New York again. For work, as she always said. Steve sighed, ran a hand over his face, and stood up. He was 42 and looked like a typical engineer, average height, with a hint of gray in his dark brown hair that he made no effort to hide, and tired blue eyes that betrayed years spent in front of drawings and computer screens. His job at a construction company was stable, even boring at times, but he loved it for its predictability. Steve designed bridges, not the grandiose ones that appear on the covers of magazines, but ordinary, working bridges that connect the suburbs of Chicago with the center. He was proud that his designs withstood Lake Michigan winds and endless traffic jams. The morning started as usual. He went downstairs to their two-story home in the Oak Park neighborhood, cozy but slightly weathered. The white paint on the kitchen cabinets had begun to peel in the corners, and the faux stone countertop bore the marks of the knife Amanda had once used to cut lemons too harshly for her favorite gin and tonic. Steve turned on the coffee maker and took some eggs and a couple of slices of bacon out of the refrigerator. While the frying pan was heating up, he glanced at the calendar hanging on the wall. Amanda is due back tomorrow evening. Or the day after tomorrow. He frowned, trying to remember what she had said before she left on Sunday. Her voice, soft but slightly distant, flashed through my memory. "I'll call you when I land, Steve. Don't wait until late." The coffee maker hissed, and he poured himself a cup, black, without sugar. Amanda always joked about his habit of drinking coffee like an old man, adding cream and a generous spoonful of brown sugar to his coffee. He smiled at the corner of his lips, but then caught himself thinking that he had not heard her voice for the third day. She didn't call on Sunday, and on Monday too. Usually she would at least send a message, "I've arrived, everything is okay," or "The meeting took too long, I'm exhausted." But this time there is silence. Steve shrugged. Probably busy. She always had a lot of meetings in New York, and he had long been accustomed to her busy schedule. Amanda worked in a marketing firm, dealing with some large clients. He never delved into the details. "You still won't understand, honey. It's chaos," she laughed when he asked one day. He sat down at the table with a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon and turned on the TV in the background. The local news was talking about traffic on I-90 and the weather forecast for windy but no snow. Steve ate slowly, looking out the window at their small backyard. The lawn needs mowing, and the tulip bed that Amanda had planted a couple of years ago looked pathetic. Spring was just beginning, and the ground had not yet warmed up. He thought he should do this over the weekend. Maybe with her, if she's not tired after the trip. Steve and Amanda were married for 12 years. They met at a party with mutual friends in downtown Chicago. He was 28, she was 25. He had just started working at his company, and she was finishing her master's degree in marketing at Northwestern University. Amanda immediately caught his attention. Tall, with long brown hair and a keen sense of humor that made him laugh louder than he was used to. They married 2 years later in a small restaurant on the lake. The wedding was modest but warm, and Steve still remembered how she looked at him that day with such confidence, as if she knew that they would live together all their lives. Now, years later, that confidence has evaporated. Their marriage wasn't bad, no. They didn't quarrel loudly, didn't throw plates at each other, didn't make a scene. But something has changed. Maybe it started when she got a promotion 4 years ago and started traveling to New York more often. Or when he was immersed in work, spending his evenings drawing instead of planning a vacation with her. They still loved each other, he was sure of it, but love had become somehow familiar, like an old jacket that you put on because it was comfortable, not because you liked it. Steve finished his coffee, put his plate in the sink, and went upstairs to get ready for work. In the bathroom, he looked at himself in the mirror. The face is tired, there are light shadows under the eyes. I need to sleep more, he thought, although he knew that was not the point. He shaved and put on a gray shirt and dark trousers, standard office attire. Before leaving, I looked into their bedroom. On Amanda's nightstand lay her favorite book, Pride and Prejudice, with a page folded over it. She read it for the third time, claiming that it was a classic that never gets old. There was an empty photo frame nearby. They hadn't put in a photo from their last trip to Colorado 2 years ago. Steve shook his head. We'll have to do this. In the garage, he got into his old 2018 Ford Focus Reliable, but already slightly creaky when cornering. The journey to the office took about half an hour if there were no traffic jams. On the way, he turned on the radio. Some old Fleetwood Mac song was playing Go Your Own Way. Steve couldn't help but think about the text, Go Your Own Way. Does this apply to him and Amanda? She goes her own way in New York. He goes his own way here in Chicago. But that's normal, right? Everyone has their own life, their own affairs. He shook his head, pushing away the thoughts. Don't be dramatic. The office greeted him with the usual hum of voices and the smell of coffee from the machine in the lobby. His colleague, Jack, greeted him with a pat on the shoulder. How are you, old man? Did you get any sleep today? Jack was a couple of years younger, but looked older due to his baldness and habit of wearing stretched sweaters. Okay, Steve muttered, sitting down at his desk. And you? Yesterday my wife made me watch some TV series about lawyers. Until 2 in the morning, can you imagine? Jack rolled his eyes. How are you? Is Amanda back? No, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, Steve answered, opening his laptop. She has business there? New York again. Jack whistled. Did she start a second family there? Steve frowned, but forced himself to smile. Very funny. Just work. Well, Jack shrugged and walked back to his desk. The rest of the day went by as usual. Steve reviewed the drawings for the new bridge over the Des Plaines River, made changes, and discussed deadlines with the team. At lunch, he ate a turkey sandwich from the cafeteria and drank more coffee. Thoughts about Amanda kept popping up, but he pushed them away. She's busy, that's normal. Her work takes time. And yet, when at 3 o'clock in the afternoon he checked his phone, and there was not a single message there, something stabbed in his chest. He texted her. Hi, how are you? Is everything okay? There was no response until the end of the working day. He returned home around 6. The evening was quiet, only the sound of the wind outside the window and the distant barking of the neighbor's dog. Steve heated up the leftover pizza and turned on the TV. There was some old movie with Tom Hanks on, but he couldn't concentrate. The question was spinning in my head. Why doesn't she answer? Maybe the phone died. Maybe she's at a meeting. Or I just forgot. He opened a bottle of beer and took a sip. The cold bitterness calmed my nerves a little. Before going to bed, he went into the bedroom again. The bed was neatly made. He always made it himself, even when Amanda was home. There was a light scent of her perfume on her pillow, something floral with a hint of vanilla. Steve lay down, looking at the ceiling. She'll be back tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. Everything will be as usual. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come immediately. The next morning, Steve woke up with a slight feeling of anxiety. The phone was silent. He wrote another message. Amanda, are you okay? Text me when you can. Then I got ready and went to work. The day dragged on slowly, like thick syrup. Colleagues joked and discussed the news, but he remained silent, immersed in his thoughts. At lunchtime, he called her long beeps, then an answering machine. This is Amanda Keller. Leave a message. He didn't leave. For what? She will see the missed one anyway. By evening, the anxiety became more acute. He called her colleague, Lisa, whom Amanda sometimes mentioned in conversations. Hi, Lisa. This is Steve, Amanda's husband. Don't you know where she is? I can't reach her. Oh, Steve, hi. Lisa's voice sounded surprised. She's in New York, as far as I know. We have a client there, a big project. Why didn't she call? No, a couple of days already. Steve tried to speak calmly. Just checking. It's strange. Lisa hesitated. I'll try to write to her. I'll let you know if anything happens. Thank you, he said and hung up. He spent the night restlessly, tossing and turning and looking at his watch. In the morning, Lisa called back. Steve, I contacted her. She said everything was fine, she was just tired. We'll be back soon. Thank you, Lisa, he exhaled, feeling the tension release. Tell her to call, okay? Certainly. Steve put the phone down and looked out the window. The wind blew dry leaves along the street. It's okay, he told himself. Just work. But somewhere in the depths of my soul, there remained a small, barely noticeable sediment, like a crack in concrete, which as an engineer he knew all too well. Small at first, but over time it could grow. It was drizzling outside the window. Small drops knocked on the glass, leaving blurry paths. He sat on the sofa in the living room, flipping through the TV channels without much interest. Footage of some reality show flashed on the screen, but his thoughts were far away. Amanda was supposed to return today. She finally wrote in the morning a short message. I'm arriving at 6:30, don't meet me, I'll take a taxi. I'm as tired as a dog. Steve looked at his watch, 7:15. She'll be home soon. He stood up, walked around the kitchen, and removed the empty bottle of beer from the table. In recent days, he tried to control himself, not to overextend himself. Lisa said Amanda was fine, just shaken. And yet something in her silence 2 days without a word left a slight residue in him, like a residue on a coffee cup that does not wash off the first time. He was used to trusting her. Amanda was always straightforward, sometimes even harsh, but honest. Or so he thought. The sound of a key in the lock made him turn around. The door opened and Amanda stepped into the hallway, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. Her brown hair was slightly disheveled. There were shadows of fatigue under her eyes, but she still looked put together. A black coat, a business suit, low-heeled shoes. In his hands is a small suitcase on wheels and a bag over his shoulder. Hi, honey, she said, placing her suitcase against the wall. Her voice was slightly hoarse, as if she had been talking all day without stopping. Hi, Steve came up and hugged her. She smelled of rain and her perfume, the same floral aroma with vanilla. How did you get there? Okay, Amanda pulled away, took off her coat and hung it on a hook. The plane was delayed for half an hour, but that's okay. I really want to shower and sleep. Tired? He nodded towards the kitchen. Would you like some coffee or something stronger? No, thank you, she smiled, but the smile came out strained. Only water and a shower. Steve brought her a glass while she took off her shoes. They talked a little, nothing serious, just about the weather, how her trip went in general. Amanda talked about a meeting with a client, about some new advertising project, but her words did not contain the usual enthusiasm. She seemed distracted, answered briefly, as if her thoughts were somewhere else. Steve chalked it up to fatigue. After a flight and 3 days of running around New York, this is normal. I'll go unpack and take a shower, she finally said, picking up her suitcase. Don't wait for me, go to bed if you want. Okay, he nodded. Glad you're home. She looked at him a little longer than usual and smiled softly. Me too. Amanda went upstairs and Steve remained below, listening to the steps creaking under her steps. He turned off the TV, put his glass in the sink, and decided to check his email, a habit that helped distract him. On the table in the hallway lay a stack of envelopes that had accumulated over a couple of days. Invoices, advertising, letter from insurance. He was sorting them when a small piece of paper fell out of the pile, a receipt folded in half. Steve picked it up and turned it around. It was a check for rent for an apartment in New York. Address, East 73rd Street, Manhattan. Amount, $2,800 per month. Name on receipt, Amanda Keller. He froze, rereading the lines. Renting an apartment. She never mentioned that she was renting in New York. She usually stayed in hotels, the company paid for it, it was part of her business trips. Steve frowned, trying to remember. Maybe she spoke, and he missed it. No, he would remember. $2,800 isn't cheap, even for New York. And why does she need an apartment if the trips only take a few days? Amanda's footsteps were heard from above. She went down to the living room, already in her home clothes, gray leggings, and an old t-shirt with the logo of her university. Her hair was damp from the shower, pulled back into a messy bun. "Are you still awake?" she asked, noticing him with a receipt in his hands. "No, I was sorting out the mail." Steve picked up the piece of paper. "What is this?" Amanda came closer and looked at the paper. Her face tensed for a second, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Oh, that's..." She shrugged, as if it were a small thing. "Apartment in New York. I took it off a couple of months ago." "Did you take it off?" Steve looked at her, trying to understand. "For what? You lived in hotels." For convenience, Amanda went into the kitchen and poured herself more water. "I'm tired of constantly wandering around hotels. Either there is no reservation, then it's noisy, or some kind of nonsense with Wi-Fi. And here is your corner, always ready. The company covers part of it, so don't worry." She spoke calmly, even casually, but something in her tone seemed too rehearsed to him. Steve placed the receipt on the table and crossed his arms. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't think it was important." Amanda turned to him and leaned against the countertop. "It's just more practical, Steve. I'm not moving there permanently. $2,800 a month is not a small thing." He tried to speak evenly, without accusations. "We could discuss." "I told you the company helps." A note of irritation flashed in her voice. "And then, these are my business trips. I'm dealing with this myself." Steve nodded, but something stirred inside. It wasn't that he didn't believe her, her explanation sounded logical. Hotels in New York can indeed be a headache, especially if you travel frequently. But why didn't she mention it earlier? They always shared such things. Or not. He suddenly realized that over the past couple of years their conversations had become shorter, more superficial. When was the last time she asked his opinion on something serious? "Okay," he said finally. "I was just surprised." "I understand." Amanda came up and put her hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. My head is just full of work." "It's okay." Steve forced himself to smile. "Go to bed, you're tired." She nodded, kissed him on the cheek, and went upstairs. Steve remained in the kitchen, looking at the receipt. He folded it in half and threw it back into the stack of papers. "Everything is logical," he told himself. "She's right, it's her job, her decision." But why then did this light, barely noticeable prick remain in the chest? As if he was missing something important. The next day passed quietly. The morning began with the usual routine: coffee, scrambled eggs, the road to work. Amanda was still sleeping when he left. She had taken the day off to rest after the trip. In the office, Steve was immersed in drawings, trying to distract himself. Jack teased him again about Amanda. "So, is your New York lady back?" But Steve just waved it off. In the evening, returning home, he found Amanda in the kitchen. She was preparing dinner pasta with chicken and cream sauce, her signature dish. The smell of garlic and parmesan filled the house, and for a second everything seemed the same as before, cozy, homely. "How is the day?" she asked, stirring the sauce. "Okay." Steve sat down at the table and opened a beer. "And yours?" "I finally got some sleep," she smiled. "I thought maybe we could go to the city tomorrow. Let's go shopping, go to the cinema." "Sounds good," he nodded. "We haven't been out for a long time." They ate dinner, chatting about small things. Amanda told about a new client who demands advertising like in the old movies. Steve shared how Jack spilled coffee on his drawings again. Everything was easy and familiar, but the receipt was still spinning in his head. He didn't bring it up again. He didn't want to spoil the evening. Amanda seemed relaxed, and he didn't want to delve into what was probably just his imagination. After dinner, they watched a series, some detective story on Netflix. Amanda snuggled up to him on the couch, resting her head on his shoulder. Her warmth, her smell, it all calmed. Maybe he's worrying for nothing. Maybe it's just fatigue and his habit of analyzing everything like an engineer, looking for cracks where there are none. But at night, when she was already asleep, Steve lay awake. He looked at the ceiling, listening to her even breathing. Apartment in New York, $2,800. For convenience. Amanda's words echoed in his head, and he tried to convince himself that it was true. But somewhere deep inside, like a weak signal on a radar, doubt arose. Small, almost unnoticeable. By Friday morning was sunny. Amanda was up earlier, humming to herself while she made coffee. Steve came downstairs and they had breakfast together, avocado toast, her favorite. She looked rested, even cheerful. "So, are we going to the city today?" she asked, spreading the toast. "Come on," Steve nodded. "We haven't walked for a long time." "Great. Maybe I'll buy something for the trip at the same time. Next week, I will go back to New York." Already, he raised his eyebrows. "Yes, the client asks for a meeting," Amanda shrugged. "Nothing unusual." "I see." Steve took a sip of coffee, looking at her. "And this apartment. Will it last for a long time?" "I don't know yet," she answered, without looking up from her toast. "Let's see how it goes." He nodded, but something stirred inside again. Doubt, subtle and sharp, like a needle. He didn't ask further. Not now. But he decided that he would talk to her later. Not to blame, but just to understand. Because, looking at her so familiar, so dear, he suddenly realized that perhaps he did not know her as well as he thought. The morning at Steve and Amanda's house began with the smell of freshly baked croissants. Amanda decided to spoil them with breakfast. She took out the frozen dough from the freezer, which she bought back in the fall, and now the kitchen was filled with the aroma of butter and hot bread. Outside, the Chicago wind whipped clouds across the sky, promising a clear but cool day. Steve sat at the table, scrolling through the news on his tablet, while Amanda busied herself at the stove. Everything looked so peaceful, so familiar that he almost forgot about his doubts. Almost. "Coffee is ready," Amanda said, placing the cup in front of him. Her hair was pulled back into a high ponytail, and she was wearing an old NYU sweatshirt that she had worn since she was a student. She looked relaxed, even happy. "Thank you," Steve smiled, putting the tablet aside. "You're a real chef today." "Well, sometimes I have to remind you why you married me," she winked, returning to the oven. They ate croissants with jam and chatted about their plans for the day. "We decided to go to downtown Chicago, go shopping on Michigan Avenue, and maybe go to the movies." Amanda wanted to buy a new bag, and Steve thought it was time to update his boots. The old ones had worn out over the winter. The conversation flowed easily, without tension, and Steve found himself thinking that maybe he was needlessly stressing himself out over that receipt. She's home, she's nearby, and everything seems to be okay. After breakfast, Amanda went upstairs to get ready while Steve tended to the dishes. He was washing the dishes when her phone, lying on the table, vibrated briefly. The screen lit up and Steve glanced automatically. It was a notification from a messenger, not the one they usually used for communication, but some other one with a green icon. The message text flashed on the screen. "See you soon, love." The signature is just the name, J. No last name, no context. Steve froze, holding the wet plate in his hands. Water dripped onto the floor, but he didn't notice. "I'll see you soon, love." Who is Jay, and why beloved? His heart beat faster, but he forced himself to breathe in and out. Maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a joke, or some client with a stupid sense of humor. He put the plate in the dryer, dried his hands with a towel, and looked at the phone again. The screen had already gone dark, but the words were imprinted in my memory. Amanda's footsteps were heard from above. Steve quickly turned to the sink, pretending to wash the next plate. She entered the kitchen, already wearing jeans and a light sweater, with a bag over her shoulder. "I'm ready," she said, taking the phone from the table. "Are we going?" "Yes, now," Steve nodded without turning around. "I'll just wipe my hands." He heard her unlock the phone and her fingers quickly tapping the screen. "Did you answer someone? This Jay? Or is he just checking the time?" Steve forced himself to smile and turned to her. "Let's go." "Let's go." Amanda put the phone in her pocket and headed towards the door. The road to the center was calm. They drove in Steve's Ford, listening to the radio. Amanda hummed along to some pop song, looking out the window, and he focused on the road, trying not to think about that message. "I'll see you soon, love." It could be anything. He didn't want to turn into a paranoid person who suspects his wife over every little thing. But in recent days, he began to notice how often she hides her phone. Amanda used to leave it anywhere on the table, on the sofa, even in the bathroom. And now he was always with her. In her pocket, in her bag, in her hand. And a couple of times he saw her quickly clean it up when he entered the room. The shopping center was noisy and crowded. They went to several stores. Amanda chose a dark blue leather bag, and Steve bought boots, simple, black, comfortable. She joked that he was boring as an engineer, always choosing the same thing, and he laughed in response. But inside his thoughts revolved around that Jay. Who is he? Colleague? Friend? Anyone from New York? Steve remembered the receipt for the apartment. Maybe this is related? They went to a cafe on the top floor of the center and grabbed coffee and sandwiches. Amanda sat across from him, scrolling through something on her phone. She smiled at the screen, and Steve involuntarily tensed. "What's so funny?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, Lisa sent a meme about our boss." Amanda turned the phone towards him, showing a picture of a cat in a business suit. "She lined everyone up at the meeting again yesterday." "Classic," Steve nodded, but his gaze glanced at the screen. It was their regular chat, not the messenger with the green icon. So she switched the app. Or is he making it up? They finished eating and went to the cinema. The film was some kind of action movie with chases and explosions, nothing special, but Amanda loved those. During the session, she checked her phone a couple of times, covering the screen with her hand. Steve noticed this out of the corner of his eye, but remained silent. Maybe work. Maybe Lisa is writing something again. Or this Jay. They returned home in the evening. Amanda immediately went into the living room, throwing her bag on the sofa, and turned on the TV. Steve got busy with dinner. He decided to make the steaks that were in the refrigerator. While the meat was roasting, he heard her laughing at something on her phone. The sound was quiet but distinct, short messages, quick replies. He looked out of the kitchen. Amanda sat staring at the screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Who's so funny there?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yes, colleagues in the chat." She looked up and smiled. "We are discussing the client. He's being weird again." "I see," Steve nodded and returned to the stove. He didn't ask further. I didn't want to arrange an interrogation, but her answer seemed too quick, too smooth, as if prepared in advance. Steve flipped the steaks, listening to the oil sizzle. "I'll see you soon, love." He imagined her writing to this Jay, sitting 2 steps away from him. No, this is nonsense. She's not like that, or like this. Dinner went smoothly. They ate, talked about the movie, and how they needed to mow the lawn tomorrow. Amanda looked as usual a little tired, but happy. After dinner, she went upstairs, saying that she wanted to read before bed. Steve stayed behind to clean the kitchen. Her phone was on the table. She forgot it when she left. The screen was dark, but he knew that if he picked it up, everything could change. Check, don't check. He clenched his fists, then relaxed them. No, he won't be that person. Not yet. But when he went to bed, the doubts were no longer so small. They grew like a shadow in the corner of the room, becoming clearer every day. J, apartment. Telephone. Steve closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. He lay listening to Amanda's breathing, and for the first time in 12 years of marriage, he thought, what if he doesn't know her at all? A rainy April evening shrouded Chicago in a gray veil. Steve stood at the living room window, watching the raindrops run down the glass, blurring the streetlights. Amanda flew to New York in the morning, another business trip, she said. For 3 days, maybe 4, depending on the client, she said, packing her suitcase the day before. Steve nodded then, kissed her goodbye, but inside him there was no longer the same peace as before. 2 weeks after that message, "I'll see you soon, my love," he tried to control himself, not to succumb to suspicion. But they grew like weeds, breaking through the concrete of his confidence. Amanda's phone became her shadow. She did not let it out of her hands, even at home. Several times Steve noticed her smiling at the screen, quickly moving it away when he entered. He didn't ask. I didn't want to quarrel, I didn't want to look jealous. But doubts accumulated, and the receipt for the apartment in New York and his name Jay were spinning in his head like pieces of a puzzle that he could not put together. Today, as he accompanied her to the airport, he felt for the first time that he could no longer just wait. Steve took out his phone, opened his laptop, and started searching. Chicago private detective. He didn't want to come to this, but he was tired of guessing. Half an hour later, he came across a website, Robert Kane Private Investigations. The reviews were good, fast, discreet, professional. Steve wrote down the number and hesitated before dialing. Kane is listening. The voice on the other end was low, slightly hoarse, like that of a person who smokes a lot. Hello, this is Steve Keller. He hesitated. I need help. Surveillance. For my wife. Give me the details, Kane answered without further questions. Who, where, when. Steve told everything. About Amanda, about her trips to New York, about the apartment on East 73rd Street. Mentioned the message, but without details, just strange contact. Kane listened in silence, only chuckled a couple of times. Okay, I'll take it, he finally said. 500 advance, 100 per day plus expenses. Photos, videos, reports, everything will be there. When is she there? I flew away today. He'll be back in 3 or 4 days. Fine, I'll start tomorrow. Send me the details by email, name, photo, apartment address. More the better. Thank you, Steve breathed. Is this confidential? Like in the grave, Kane grinned. Wait for news. Steve hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and shame. He hired a detective behind his wife's back. It wasn't like him, he was always rational, straightforward. But now he didn't know who to trust, her or his instincts. Meanwhile, in New York, Amanda was sitting at a table in a cozy restaurant on the Upper East Side. Outside the window, the lights of Manhattan flickered. Reflected in the wet asphalt, the rain had just stopped. She was wearing a dark green dress that emphasized her figure, and her hair was loose and slightly curled at the ends. A man sat opposite her, tall, with dark hair touched with gray and a confident smile. His name was David Reynolds, and he was more than just anyone. David was a rising star in local politics, a city councilman who was already being whispered about as a future mayoral candidate. He was about 45, and he radiated charisma, a deep voice, an attentive gaze, a slight carelessness in his gestures. You look amazing today, he said, raising his glass of red wine. For you, Amanda. Thank you, she smiled, clinking glasses with him. You're okay, too. New suit? Especially for you, David winked. You have to comply. They laughed, and the conversation flowed easily, like wine in their glasses. Amanda had known David for almost a year. Their acquaintance began by chance at one of her company's events, where he was a guest. She worked on a campaign for his team, and at first it was just a job. But then the meetings became more frequent, the conversations became longer, and the looks became warmer. How was your day? David asked, cutting off a piece of steak. Crazy, Amanda sighed. The client changed the concept again. I had to redraw the presentation all day. And you did it, as always, he smiled. You're a genius at this. Well, I'm not a genius, but I'm trying, she shrugged, but sincere joy from the praise flashed in her eyes. I'm glad you're here, he said quietly. These days without you are going on too long. Me too, Amanda looked into his eyes, and for a second her smile wavered. She knew it was wrong. She knew that Steve was waiting for her at home. But here, with David, she felt alive, wanted, not just part of the routine. The next day, Robert Kane was already in New York. He took the morning flight, rented a car, and headed to East 73rd Street. Amanda's apartment turned out to be in a neat 5-story red brick building, with black fire escapes and a well-kept entrance. Kane, a short man of about 50 with short hair and a tatty jacket, looked like an ordinary passerby. He parked across the street, took out his camera and telephoto lens, and waited. Steve received a message late that evening. He sat in the kitchen with a bottle of beer, looking at the phone screen. She's not alone. His fingers gripped the bottle tighter than necessary. He didn't know what he was expecting, an empty apartment and Amanda's lonely evenings, or something worse. As long as he didn't see the photo, he could pretend it didn't mean anything. Colleague, client. But inside he already felt how something he had been building for years was collapsing. The dim light of the table lamp illuminated Steve's kitchen, casting long shadows on the walls. The wind howled outside the window, rattling the shutters of the neighboring house. Steve was sitting at the table. In front of him was an open bottle of whiskey and a phone on which a new message from Robert Kane was shining. He received it an hour ago, but still couldn't bring himself to open the attached files. His fingers trembled when he finally pressed the screen. Third day of surveillance. She lives as if in two worlds. The apartment on East 73rd is not just for business trips. She's dating a guy, David Reynolds, a politician from the city council. I'm attaching photos and videos. There's no direct evidence of infidelity yet, but it doesn't look like work. Decide what's next. Steve reread the text 3 times. Every word sank into my brain like a nail into wood. Men's things. Another toothbrush. David Reynolds. He opened the photo. Amanda coming out of the entrance, laughing with some tall man in a dark coat. In the next photo, they are sitting in a restaurant, his hand covering hers. The video was short, 20 seconds. They walk down the street. He says something. She nods, smiling. Nothing explicit, but enough to make Steve's chest tighten. He put the phone down, poured whiskey into a glass, and drank it in one gulp. My throat burned, but it didn't drown out the chaos in my head. Two worlds. His Amanda, the one who had cooked him pasta a week ago, who slept next to him in their Chicago bedroom, lived a different life. With another man. Steve clenched his fists, trying to breathe evenly. Maybe Kane is wrong. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. He got up and walked around the kitchen. The floorboards creaked underfoot, a reminder of how long they had been meaning to fix them. Together, like husband and wife, Steve stood at the sink, looking at Amanda's empty coffee cup she left it the morning before leaving. He remembered how she said, "I'll be back on Tuesday, don't be bored." Her voice was light, almost carefree. How could she lie so calmly? Or is it not a lie, but just another truth? Steve returned to the table, picked up his phone, and texted Kane, "Keep following. Need details. Thanks." He did not know what he was waiting for, evidence that would completely break him, or a refutation that would restore him to peace. For now, he was just clinging to the hope that it was a mistake. In New York, Amanda woke up in her apartment on East 73rd Street. The morning was clear, the sun's rays filtered through the thin curtains, drawing patterns on the wooden floor. She got up, put on her robe, and walked into the kitchen. There was a bottle of Pinot Noir on the table, half empty, with 2 glasses next to it. Amanda smiled, remembering how David joked about his last speech to the city council. He was like that, easygoing, charming, but with a sharp mind that captivated her from the first meeting. She turned on the coffee maker and took her mug out of the cabinet. There was another one nearby, black, with the logo of some political forum. His mug. Amanda froze, looking at her. It was so natural, his things here, his presence. But every time she noticed this, she felt like a thin thread connected her to Chicago, to home, to Steve. She sat down with coffee and opened the phone. Message from Lisa. "How are things in the Big Apple? Survived the client?" Amanda answered briefly. "Yes, for now. I'm tired, but it's okay." Then I opened the messenger with a green icon. There was a new one from David. "Good morning, beautiful. Shall we meet today?" She wrote. "Yes, after work. I'll call you." She smiled and took a sip of coffee. Her life here flowed at its own rhythm, and she had almost gotten used to this split Chicago and New York, Steve and David, duty and desire. In the afternoon, she went to the office, held a couple of meetings, and discussed the advertising campaign with the team. Everything is as usual, but during the breaks, she thought about David, the way he looked at her, the way he listened to her, the way he made her feel special, and about Steve, about his calmness, his reliability, about the years they spent together. She didn't want to lose any of them. Bye. New York woke up to the sounds of the morning honking of cars and distant sirens. In the apartment on East 73rd Street, Amanda stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee. Beyond the glass lay the Upper East Side neat brick buildings, trees with barely leafed leaves, and hurrying passers-by. She loved this place, its rhythm, its energy, its difference from the quiet suburbs of Chicago. Here she felt different, not just an engineer's wife, but a woman who could do anything. Her phone vibrated on the table. Message from David. Good morning, my muse. Breakfast at 10. I have an hour before the meeting. Amanda smiled, took a sip of coffee, and replied, Yes, go ahead. Where? A minute later, the answer came. Cafe on Lexington. You know what? I'm waiting. She put down the cup and went to the mirror in the hallway. In the reflection is a tall, slender woman with brown hair, slightly disheveled from sleep, but still attractive. She was 38, and she knew how to use her strengths. A sharp mind, a soft smile, the ability to listen and say exactly what was needed. Amanda had been living in two worlds for several months now, and it was getting easier every day. There was Steve in Chicago, reliable, predictable, like the bridges he built. She loved him in her own way, but this love had long ago become a habit, a cozy routine that no longer worried her. There was David in New York, bright, ambitious, a man next to whom she felt alive. She had not planned this double life, but when David entered her world, it became impossible to refuse. And now she balanced between them like an acrobat on a tightrope, confident that she would not fall. She put on jeans, a white blouse, and a light jacket, and pulled her hair into a low ponytail. Before leaving, she glanced at the apartment, a neat living room with a sofa and a bookcase, a kitchen with two mugs in the sink, a bedroom where his jacket hung in the closet next to her dresses. This place became her second home, and she didn't feel guilty that it existed. It was convenient, practical, as she explained to Steve. And that David became a part of this life, well, that's just a bonus. The cafe on Lexington Avenue was small but stylish. Wooden tables, large windows, the smell of freshly brewed coffee. David was already waiting for her, sitting by the window overlooking the street. He was wearing a shirt with rolled-up sleeves and dark trousers, casual, but with a hint of status. His dark gray hair was slightly disheveled, and in his eyes there was that same fire that touched everyone who knew him. David Reynolds, 45, a member of the New York City Council, a man whose name was increasingly appearing in local newspapers. He was preparing for elections, not just re-election to the council, but for something more, perhaps the mayor's seat. And Amanda was there, helping him build this path. Hello, beautiful. He stood up, hugged her, lightly holding his hands on her waist. Did you get enough sleep? More or less, she smiled, sitting down opposite him. And you? You look like you've been writing speeches all night. I almost guessed right, David grinned, taking a sip of espresso. The team sat until 2 o'clock yesterday discussing strategy. This election is like a chess game, only with a million pieces. And you, of course, are the king. Amanda raised an eyebrow. More like a queen, he winked. And you are my secret passage. They laughed, and the waiter brought her coffee and a croissant. David ordered an omelet, but spent more time picking at it with his fork than eating it. His mind was clearly occupied with other things. Amanda knew that look. It turned on the politician mode, where every detail mattered. So what do you have for today? She asked, taking a bite of the croissant. Meeting with sponsors at noon, then an interview with the Post. They want to know how I'm going to get Brooklyn out of debt. He shook his head. And in the evening dinner with the team. Will you join? If I have time, Amanda shrugged. I have a presentation at 3, and the client is acting weird again. You're always on time. David leaned closer, lowering his voice. You are my other half in this chaos, you know? She nodded, but something stabbed in her chest. Second half. He didn't know that she already had the first one, Steve, now sitting in Chicago, probably drinking his black coffee and checking the blueprints. David had no idea about her marriage. She never mentioned her husband, did not wear the ring in New York. She took it off before trips and left it in a box at home. To David, she was Amanda Keller, the marketer, the muse, the woman who fit perfectly into his life. and she allowed him to think so. David Reynolds was more than just a politician, he was a visionary with a vision. Born in Brooklyn, into a middle-class family, his father is a teacher, his mother is a nurse. He made his way to the top through persistence and charm, graduated from Columbia University, worked as a lawyer, then went into politics. His career took off 5 years ago when he won a seat on the city council on promises of reform and transparency. Now he looked further to the mayor's office, to the chance to change the city. But behind this ambition, there was also a vulnerability. He was lonely. Divorced 10 years ago, no serious relationship since then, until I met Amanda. After breakfast, they walked along Lexington Avenue. David walked quickly, talking about sponsors who promised support but demanded guarantees. Amanda listened, nodding, occasionally interjecting questions. What if they change their mind? Or, are you sure this won't scare off voters? He valued her opinion. She saw the details that he missed in his impulse. Have you ever thought about politics? He asked suddenly, stopping at the passage. I? Amanda laughed. No, I'd rather stay behind the scenes. There's less risk there. But in vain, David looked at her seriously. You have everything to be ahead. Intelligence, charisma, endurance. Thank you, she smiled, but looked away. She liked the way he saw her, but she knew she couldn't be who he thought she was. Not completely. They parted at the metro. He went to a meeting. She returned to the apartment. During the day, she worked on a presentation, called Lisa, and sent reports to her superiors. The usual routine. But in the evening, when David called and said, "Come, the team is assembled. It's boring without you," she did not refuse. I put on a dark dress, light makeup, and took a taxi. Dinner took place in a restaurant in the city center, noisy, with long tables and a buzz of voices. David's team, young assistants, analysts, a couple of old friends discussed plans, joked, and drank beer. Amanda sat next to him, laughing at their stories, sometimes whispering something in his ear when the conversation turned to strategy. Her presence was natural, as if she had always been part of this circle. Amanda, are you sure you don't want to go to headquarters? Asked one of the assistants, a lanky guy named Tony. You could build us all in a week. I'm already building you up, she winked, and everyone laughed. David put his hand on her back, stroking her lightly. It was unobtrusive, but noticeable. No one was surprised. The team was already used to the fact that they were close. Amanda didn't move away, but at that moment her phone vibrated in her bag. She took it out and looked at the screen, missed from Steve. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly put the phone back. Not now. Is everything okay? David noticed her movement. Yes, just work, she smiled, placing her hand on his shoulder. Nothing urgent. He nodded, and the evening continued. They returned to talking about elections, how to beat competitors, and how to attract young people. Amanda was in her element. She suggested ideas, joked, and kept a balance between lightness and seriousness. She knew how to manage people, how to be someone who was listened to. And David looked at her with admiration, not suspecting that this woman sitting next to her already belonged to another world. Late at night, she returned to the apartment. David wanted to accompany her, but she refused. You have to get up early tomorrow, but I need to get some sleep. He kissed her on the cheek by the taxi and said, See you tomorrow, my other half. Amanda smiled, but in the car her face became more serious. She opened her phone and saw a message from Steve. How are you? Is everything okay? Posted 2 hours ago. She replied, Yes, everything is okay. I'm tired. The client is losing his mind. Good night. She leaned back in her seat, looking out the window. Steve didn't know about David. David didn't know about Steve. And she kept them both in the dark with a skill she didn't expect from herself. To Steve, she was a wife, calm, slightly distant, but familiar. David a partner, a muse, a woman who inspired him to move forward. She didn't lie to them directly, she simply held back, dosed the truth, and left room for their own conclusions. In the apartment, she undressed and went to bed. The pillows smelled like David. He'd slept here a couple of times when they'd stayed up late. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Her life was like a chessboard, where she played white and black at the same time. And so far she has won. Steve trusted her, David adored her. But somewhere in the depths of her soul, she understood that this game could not last forever. For now, she enjoyed every move, not thinking about the ending. David, meanwhile, was sitting in his office in Brooklyn. It was after midnight, but he could not leave papers, plans, speeches. On the table was a framed photo of the team with Amanda smiling next to him. He looked at her, feeling warm. She was his luck, his support. He didn't know what she was hiding, and he didn't want to know having her around was enough for him. In his world, she was wife number 2, and he dreamed of making it official one day. But this was the future, and for now he was simply enjoying the present, where Amanda Keller was his. Only him. Tuesday was cold and windy in Chicago. The sky over the city was covered with gray clouds, and gusts from Lake Michigan drove wisps of dust and last year's leaves through the streets. Steve stood at the stove in their Oak Park home, stirring spaghetti sauce. The smell of tomatoes and basil filled the kitchen, but the familiar comfort of this aroma could not break through the wall of thoughts that pressed on him. Amanda was supposed to return this evening, she wrote in the morning. I'm arriving at 6:45, I'll be home by 8. Don't wait until dinner, I'll eat at the airport. But Steve cooked anyway. He needed something to occupy his hands to keep his head from completely falling apart. The last days have been hell. Photos and reports from Robert Kane lay in a folder on his laptop, hidden under the innocent title, Bridge 17 Project. He looked at them over and over again. Amanda with David in the restaurant, his hand on her back, a man's jacket in her closet, boots by the door. Each picture was like a hammer blow to a crack in their marriage, and this crack grew, threatening to break everything that he considered his life. But he could not bring himself to talk to her. Not now. I wasn't 100% sure yet. Or maybe he was just afraid to hear the truth. Steve turned off the stove and covered the pan with a lid. The clock showed 7:50. He walked into the living room and sat on the sofa, staring at the dark TV screen. His reflection looked back a tired man with bags under his eyes and gray hair that seemed thicker than a month ago. He hasn't slept properly for a week. At night, he was tormented by fragments of dreams. Amanda laughing with someone else, her voice calling him, but he could not find her. During the day, he kept himself under control. He went to work, joked with Jack, checked the drawings. But everything inside him was screaming. The sound of a key in the lock made him flinch. The door opened and Amanda entered the hallway. She looked as usual, dark coat, rolling suitcase, shoulder bag. Her hair was slightly disheveled from the wind, and shadows of fatigue lay under her eyes. "Hi, honey," she said, placing her suitcase against the wall. The voice was soft, slightly hoarse, like after a long day. "Hi." Steve stood up and forced himself to smile. "How did you get there?" "Okay." Amanda took off her coat and hung it on a hook. "Only at the airport the line for taxis was like rush hour. I'm terribly tired. Do you want dinner?" "I made spaghetti." He nodded towards the kitchen. "Oh, you're a miracle," she smiled, and for a second everything seemed the same. "Come on, I'll just wash my hands." They sat down at the table and ate in silence. Amanda praised the sauce and said the food in New York was not the same, as it was better at home. Steve nodded, but he now passed every glance, every word through a filter of doubt. She sat across from him, looking so familiar in an old t-shirt, with her hair pulled back into a messy bun, but he was no longer sure who she was. Wife, or an actress playing a role. He looked at her hands, imagining how they touched this David, and his throat tightened. "How's work?" he asked to fill the silence. "Oh, don't ask." Amanda rolled her eyes. The client turned everything upside down again. 3 days of complete chaos. "And you?" "Everything is the same," Steve shrugged. "We are finishing the bridge to Des Plaines. The puzzle will be due soon." "You're doing great," she smiled. "Soon you will be a famous engineer." "I don't think so," he tried to joke, but his voice sounded muffled. After dinner, Amanda went upstairs to unpack, while Steve stayed behind to clean the kitchen. He washed the dishes, listening to her walk around the bedroom. Every sound, the creaking of the floor, the rustling of a suitcase, seemed louder to him than usual. He wanted to shout, Who is David? Why are his things in your apartment? But the words got stuck in my throat. He was afraid. Afraid of her answer, afraid to see the lie in her eyes, afraid that their marriage would collapse right here in this kitchen. The night dragged on slowly. Steve lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Amanda slept next to him. Her breathing was even calm, but he could not close his eyes. Questions were swirling in my head. Why didn't she tell me about David? How long does it last? Does she still love him? He turned and looked at her. Her face was relaxed, almost childlike in sleep. He remembered their first night in this house, how they laughed as they unpacked boxes, how she danced in the middle of the empty living room to the radio. Where is Amanda? And who is this woman next to him now? In the morning, she got up early, humming something to herself while she made coffee. Steve went downstairs, feeling tiredness pulling him to the ground. He wanted to talk, but instead he just watched her move around the kitchen. Her phone lay on the table, and every time it vibrated, Steve tensed. Is this David texting her, "Good morning, love"? Or is it Lisa or work? He didn't know, and it was killing him. Are you okay? Amanda asked, noticing his gaze. You look tired. I didn't get enough sleep, he shrugged, trying to sound normal. Job. Take the day off. She came up and put her hand on his shoulder. You take on too much. Maybe, he nodded, but her touch did not calm, but only intensified the storm inside. He wanted to grab her hand and ask, Who are you? What are you hiding? But instead, he remained silent. The day passed in a kind of fog. Amanda stayed home, working on her laptop in the living room, while Steve went to the office. He sat at the table, looking at the drawings, but the lines blurred before his eyes. Jack noticed his condition and patted him on the back. Hey, old man, what's wrong with you? Looks like a zombie. I didn't sleep much, Steve muttered. Amanda is back, and you're not sleeping? Jack grinned. Is she squeezing all the juice out of you? Steve forced himself to smile, but his gut tightened. If only Jack knew. He went into the meeting room, closed the door, and sat down, dropping his head in his hands. He needed to talk to her. Today. Otherwise, he will go crazy. But how to start? I hired a detective. I know about David. Or simply, do you still love me? He didn't know what was worse, hearing the truth or remaining in this limbo. In the evening, he returned home with firm intentions. Amanda was sitting on the sofa, leafing through a magazine. The TV was playing in the background, some old movie with Meryl Streep. She looked up and smiled. Hello, how's your day? Okay, Steve sat down next to him, feeling his heart pounding. And you? Quiet, she shrugged. I finished the presentation and sent it. Now I'm resting. Okay, he nodded, clenching his fists on his knees. Listen, Amanda. What? She turned to him. Something flashed in her eyes, surprise. Wariness? The words got stuck. He looked at her, and everything he wanted to say collapsed under the weight of her gaze. Nothing. Just glad you're home. Me too, she smiled and ruffled his hair. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you can have a beer and relax. Come on, he nodded, although relaxing was the last thing he was capable of. They drank a bottle and watched a movie. Amanda snuggled up to him, resting her head on his shoulder, and Steve felt her warmth, her scent the same one, with a hint of vanilla. He wanted to hug her, pull her closer, but instead he sat like a stone. She seemed so sincere, so at home. Maybe he made it all up. Maybe Kane made a mistake, and the photo was just a coincidence. But then he remembered the boots, the jacket, her smile in those pictures with David, and the doubts returned with renewed vigor. The night was sleepless again. Steve lay there, listening to her breathing, and felt hopelessness sucking him in like a quagmire. He couldn't do this anymore. In the morning, he decided to talk. But not now. Another day to collect my thoughts. He turned on his side, closed his eyes, but images flashed before them. Amanda in New York, David, their laughter, their lives that he was not a part of. The Chicago night was dark and moonless. The wind from the lake hummed through the windows, as if trying to break into Steve and Amanda's house. The kitchen where they had just had dinner now seemed alien. Cold chicken on the table, a frying pan with burnt rice, silence broken only by the creaking of the floorboards under Steve's feet. He stood at the sink, washing dishes, trying to keep his hands busy so as not to let his thoughts tear him to pieces. Amanda returned home a couple of hours ago tired, but cheerful, with a suitcase and her usual smile. She told about New York, about a client who exhausted all his nerves, and Steve listened, nodding, but everything was seething inside him. He wanted to talk, he wanted to express everything that had accumulated, but every time he looked at her, he lost his resolve. She was too familiar to ruin their evening like that. Amanda sat in the living room, leafing through a magazine while he finished cleaning. Her phone lay on the couch next to her, and every time it vibrated, Steve tensed. He didn't know who was writing Lisa, work, or someone else. In recent days, he had been living on the edge, balancing between the desire to believe her and the evidence that Robert Kane sent him from New York. Photos, reports, pictures of the apartment, all this was in a folder on his laptop, hidden under the innocent name Bridge 17 Project. He reviewed them at night when she was sleeping, and each time he convinced himself to wait a little longer to collect more facts. But today something has changed. The silence in the house became unbearable, and he felt that if he didn't take a step, he would simply go crazy. The ringing of the phone interrupted his thoughts. Steve wiped his hands on a towel and took his cell phone out of his pocket. Kane's number. He walked to the corner of the kitchen, away from the living room, and answered, trying to speak quietly. Keller. Kane's voice was hoarse as usual, but there was a hint of tension in it. There is news. Big ones. What? Steve clutched the phone, his heart pounding. I dug deeper, as you asked. I checked her documents, connections, everything I could get my hands on. She's not just living a double life, Steve. She has a second set of documents. My maiden name is Amanda Wilson. Passport, driver's license, bank accounts. Everything is pure, everything is real. Steve froze, Kane's words hitting like a hammer on glass. Amanda Wilson. Her maiden name. He knew her, she mentioned her sometimes, laughing about how difficult it was to get used to Keller after the wedding. But the second set of documents, for what? You are sure? He asked, his voice breaking into a whisper. Absolutely, Kane coughed. And that's not all. I found something else. David Reynolds, that politician she's hanging out with. He's got engaged. Yesterday evening, at some closed event. Not official yet, but rumors have already started. And you know with whom? With Amanda Wilson. Steve felt the floor disappear from under his feet. He leaned against the wall to keep from falling. Engagement. Amanda Wilson. His wife, his Amanda, is about to marry another man. Officially. He opened his mouth, but could not squeeze out a sound. Chaos was spinning in my head. Her smile tonight, her voice, her, "Don't wait up with dinner, honey." It was all a lie. Or another truth that he didn't fit into. Steve, are you there? Kane's voice brought him back to reality. Yes, he swallowed, his throat dry. What else? That's all for now. She came back to you today, right? I can keep digging if you want. But this isn't just a romance anymore, man. This is serious. Keep going, Steve exhaled. I need to know everything. Okay, I'll send new photos tomorrow. Hang in there. Kane hung up and Steve stood there looking at the phone. Amanda Wilson. Engagement. Second set of documents. It was not just a betrayal, it was another life that she built behind his back. He remembered their wedding, her white dress, her oath, for better or for worse. And now she swears to someone else. His mind refused to accept it, but the facts lay before him like stones on the road. He heard footsteps. Amanda walked into the kitchen, holding a magazine in her hands. You've been whispering there for a long time, she said with a slight smile. Job? Yes, Steve nodded, putting the phone in his pocket. His voice sounded muffled, but she didn't seem to notice. I was just clarifying the details. Never mind it. She came up and hugged him from behind, pressing her cheek to his back. You work too much. Maybe we can go to the cinema tomorrow. Maybe, he forced himself to answer, although her warmth now burned like hot iron. He stood motionless, afraid that if he turned around, he would not be able to restrain himself and would spill everything. She kissed him on the shoulder and walked back into the living room. Steve looked after her, feeling like everything was collapsing inside. She was here, in his house, in his life, but at the same time somewhere else with a different name, with a different man, with a different destiny. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to scream, grab her, and demand an explanation, but he was silent. While he was silent, the night passed in some kind of nightmare half-sleep. Steve lay next to her, listening to her even breathing, and could not close his eyes. Amanda Wilson. Engagement. These words were spinning in my head like a broken record. He imagined her with this David, how she laughs, how she puts on a ring, how she plans a wedding. And him? Who is he in this story? The husband she keeps in reserve? Or just a fool who believed for too long? In the morning, she was the first to get up, as usual. Steve came downstairs when she was already making coffee. Her movements were so familiar. She took out mugs, poured sugar, and hummed something under her breath. He looked at her and didn't recognize her. This was not his Amanda, or him, but only half. "Good morning," she said, placing the cup in front of him. "Did you get enough sleep?" "Not really," he shrugged, trying not to look into her eyes. "You've been strange lately." She sat down opposite him and frowned. "Is something wrong?" "It's okay," he lied. "I'm just tired." "Well, rest then," she smiled, but a note of weariness flashed in her voice. "I'm at home today, I'll work here. Maybe we can order something in the evening." "Come on," he nodded, although food was the last thing on his mind. The day passed slowly. Steve left for work, but couldn't concentrate in the office. The drawings of the bridge lay in front of him, but he saw only her face, her lies. He opened the mail. Kane sent new photos. Amanda is in New York, at some event, next to David. She is in a dark dress, smiling, holding a glass. In the next photo is her hand, and a ring glitters on her finger. Not what he gave her 12 years ago. Other. Steve closed his laptop, feeling nausea creeping up his throat. Ring. Engagement. It was real. She wasn't just dating this man, she was going to become his wife. Officially, under a different name, with a different life. He stood up and walked around the office, ignoring Jack's surprised look. He needed air, space, at least something so as not to suffocate from this truth. In the evening, he returned home feeling like a shadow of himself. Amanda ordered pizza and turned on some TV series. They sat on the couch, ate, but Steve could hardly taste it. She was chatting about something about work, about a new client, and he nodded, not listening. His gaze kept falling on her hands. There was no ring, the one he saw in the photo. She took it off before returning. "Certainly. She's thought of everything." "Are you listening to me?" she asked suddenly, poking him with her elbow. "Yes." He blinked and forced himself to smile. "Sorry, I was lost in thought." "About what?" "About work," he lied again. "Deadlines are running out." "Take a vacation," she shrugged. "We need to rest." "Maybe," he nodded, but his head was spinning. "Relax? With you? Or with the one called Amanda Wilson?" The night was sleepless again. Steve lay there, looking at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do. He could have made a scandal, shown her the photo, demanded the truth. But what will this give? She will lie again or confess, and then their marriage will collapse completely. And he was not ready to lose it. Not yet. He still loved her, the Amanda who slept next to her, not the one who wore another man's ring. And this love held him in a vice, not allowing him to leave or stay. In the morning, he decided to wait. Just a little more. Kane will find more, and then he will know what to do. But something dark was already growing inside him, not just anger, but despair mixed with paranoia. Every glance, every word now seemed part of a game that he did not understand, and he was afraid that he would lose without even starting to fight. The dim light of the living room lamp cast soft shadows on the walls of the Oak Park house. The wind howled outside the window, rattling the branches of the old oak tree in the yard. Steve sat on the couch, clutching an empty coffee cup, his gaze glued to Amanda, who sat in the chair opposite her with her laptop on her lap. She worked or pretended to work, her fingers lightly tapped the keys, and her usual concentrated smile played on her face. The TV screen was turned off, and the silence in the room was broken only by the sound of her typing and occasional gusts of wind behind the glass. Steve felt the pressure building inside him, like steam in a cauldron that was about to explode. Today, he decided to talk. Don't lay out everything you know about David, about the documents, about the engagement, but just start. See how she reacts. Coldly, without emotion, like an engineer checking the strength of a structure. He cleared his throat and put the cup on the table. Amanda looked up, eyebrow raised slightly. "Did you want to say something?" she asked without looking up from the screen. "Yes," Steve nodded, trying to keep his voice even. "I want to talk about your trips to New York." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she quickly continued typing as if nothing had happened. "What exactly?" she answered without looking at him. "You know, this is work. I explained it to you 100 times." "I know," he crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back on the sofa. "But you go there too often, almost every week, sometimes for 3 days, sometimes for 5. This is more than before." Amanda sighed, closed her laptop, and placed it on the coffee table. She looked at him. Her eyes were calm, but there was a hint of irritation in them. "Steve, it's not too often, it's my job," she said, emphasizing the last word. "The clients in New York are big shots, you know that. They require meetings, discussions, presentations. I can't say no to them because my career depends on it." "I don't argue that this is work." Steve leaned forward. His voice remained level, but everything was boiling inside. "But before, you checked by phone, via video conference. And now you fly there every time. Why?" She rolled her eyes, leaned back in her chair, and crossed her arms, mirroring his pose. "Because times have changed," she answered a little sharper. "Competition has increased. Clients want to see me in person. They want to shake my hand, look me in the eyes. It's not just calls, Steve, it's relationships. You're an engineer, you understand how important details are." He nodded, but her words sounded like a rehearsed script. He saw her in New York in a photo with a glass of wine, with a smile, with a man who was clearly not a client. But he didn't mention it. Not yet. "I understand," he said, looking into her eyes. "But don't you think it's too much? You are home for 2 or 3 days, then you leave again. We hardly see each other." Amanda frowned, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're exaggerating," she shook her head. "I'm home more often than you think. And then, you are also busy work, drawings, bridges. We both live our own lives. This is fine." "Fine?" Steve narrowed his eyes, trying not to lose his temper. "I don't see my wife for weeks, and you say that this is normal?" "Yes, okay," she raised her voice, a note of irritation appearing in her tone. "We're not on a honeymoon, Steve. We have been married for 12 years. Married people don't sit on each other's heads 24/7. I have a job, you have a job. What do you want from me to drop everything and sit at home?" "I didn't say that." He clenched his fists, feeling anger breaking through his restraint. "I just want to understand why you spend so much time there. What is there that is not here?" Amanda stood up, her movements abrupt, almost theatrical. She walked around the room and stopped at the window, looking into the darkness. "Are you serious?" She turned around, her voice became colder. "Do you want to know what it is? That's where my career is, Steve. There are opportunities there that don't exist in Chicago. Do you think I fly there for fun? I plow so that we can live the way we live." "We?" He stood up, stepped towards her, but stopped a couple of meters away. "You say we, but I don't see how it's we. You are there, I am here. You don't even call when you leave. Is 2 days of silence normal too?" She turned to him, her eyes sparkling. "Oh, so that's the thing," she said, crossing her arms. "You don't trust me. This is not about New York. This is about your obsession. You want to control my every move, right? Obsessiveness." Steve felt the blood rush to his face, but he forced himself to inhale and exhale. "I don't ask for an account of your every step. I just want to know what's going on. You are my wife, Amanda. I have the right to ask." "Right?" She grinned, but the laugh was harsh, almost evil. You have no right to interrogate me as if I were a criminal. I'm working, Steve. I don't sit in an office from 9 to 5 like you. I have a different rhythm. And if you can't accept it, that's your problem, not mine. He looked at her, and in her words he heard not only defense, but also attack. She turned everything around as if he was to blame for the mistrust, for his questions, for the fact that their marriage was cracking at the seams. He wanted to shout, "I know about David, about your documents, about the engagement." But instead he clenched his jaw and swallowed his anger. He wouldn't let her get away from the topic so easily. "I'm not interrogating," he said, his voice becoming quieter, but firmer. "I ask because I care. You are leaving, and I don't know where you are, who you are with, what you are doing. You don't even write when you land. It's not an obsession, Amanda. This is caring." Care. She stepped towards him. Her face was half a meter from his. "This is not concern. This is distrust. Do you think I'm hiding something there? Why am I having fun with my lover in New York while you are building bridges here?" Steve froze. Her words hit too close to the truth, and for a second he thought she knew about the detective, about the photo, about everything. But her gaze was defiant, not guilty. She was bluffing, testing him, and he didn't give in. "I didn't say that," he replied, holding her gaze. "But you said it yourself. Maybe I should think about it." Amanda stepped back, her eyes narrowed. She was silent for a few seconds, then shook her head. "You're unbearable," she said finally. "I try for us, and you turn it into some kind of thriller. If you don't believe me, that's your problem. I'm not going to make excuses for my work." "I'm not asking for excuses." Steve took a step towards her, but stopped when she raised her hand, as if putting up a barrier. "I ask for honesty. You could at least call, write, keep me informed. But you don't. Why?" "Because I'm busy," she almost shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. "Do you think I'm on vacation there? I work from morning until night and then fall into bed. I don't have time to check on you, Steve. And if you can't come to terms with this, then I don't know what to tell you." He looked at her, and in her words he heard not only a lie, but also a masterful game. She accused him, shifted the blame, made him the aggressor, and it worked. He felt anger mixed with doubt. Maybe he's really exaggerating. Maybe it's just work, and he sees something that isn't there. But then he remembered the ring on her finger in New York, the second document, her maiden name. No, this is not his invention. This is reality. "Okay," he said finally, sinking back onto the sofa. "Let there be work. But I want you to at least warn me when you leave and when you return. It's not that much, right?" Amanda looked at him, her face softening, but her eyes remained wary. "Okay," she nodded. "I will write, if it makes you feel better." "Thank you," he nodded, although her concession did not bring relief. This was not a victory, but a temporary truce. She took the laptop and returned to her chair. The conversation ended, but the tension remained hanging in the air, like the smell of cold food. Steve looked at her, his thoughts spinning in an endless whirlpool. She got out. She accused him, turned the tables, and made him feel guilty. And he restrained himself, did not shout, did not lay out everything he knew. But that didn't mean he gave up. The night passed in silence. Amanda went to bed first, and Steve stayed downstairs, staring at the dark TV screen. He replayed their conversation over and over again. She was good, too good. Her words, her intonations, her gaze, everything was calibrated, as if she knew how to calm him down, how to keep him at a distance. But he no longer believed her. Not completely. He saw the cracks in its history, felt them, like an engineer checking a bridge before it collapses. In the morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She made coffee, toasted him, even kissed him on the cheek before he left for work. Steve smiled back, but everything was cold inside. He didn't know how much longer he could live like this, pretend, hold back his emotions, wait. Kane had promised new evidence, and he hoped it would give him clarity. Because now he was on the brink between love and hatred, between faith and despair. And every step Amanda took only brought him closer to the edge. The morning in Steve and Amanda's house began with the usual silence, broken only by the hiss of the coffee maker and the distant noise of cars outside the window. A week had passed since their cold conversation in the living room, a week filled with forced smiles, short phrases, and the feeling that they were both walking on thin ice. Steve kept himself under control as best he could. He went to work, checked the drawings, joked with Jack, but everything was seething inside him. Amanda seemed to return to her role as the caring wife who cooks dinner and asks how her day was. She even started texting him when she was late at the office, as she had promised. But this did not reassure me. He now passed every message from her, every glance of hers through a filter of doubt, knowing that behind her words there was another life hidden. That morning she came downstairs earlier than usual, already dressed jeans, blouse, shoulder bag. Steve was standing at the stove, frying eggs, when she walked into the kitchen, holding the phone in her hands. "Good morning," she said, putting her bag on the chair. Her voice was a little tense, but she smiled. "You got up early." "I couldn't sleep," Steve nodded without turning around. "Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Steve, I need to go to New York today." Something happened to the client. They called urgently. He froze, the fork in his hand hovering over the frying pan. New York. Again. He slowly turned and looked at her. Her face was calm, but there was a shadow in her eyes, something she was trying to hide. "What's happened?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "Problems with the campaign," Amanda shrugged, but the movement came out too abruptly. "The client threatens to break the contract if I don't fly over and sort it out. This won't last long, a day or two." "A day or two," he repeated, looking into her eyes. "You just returned." "I know," she sighed and looked away, "but it's important. I can't let them down." Steve nodded, although his insides tightened. He wanted to say, "You're lying. This is not work. This is him." But instead, he simply turned off the stove and put the frying pan in the sink. "When are you flying?" he asked, wiping his hands on a towel. "In a couple of hours." She took the bag, walked up to him, and put her hand on his shoulder. "I'll call you when I land, okay? Don't be angry." "I'm not angry," he lied, forcing himself to smile. "Good luck there." She kissed him on the cheek and left to get ready. Steve stood listening to her walk upstairs, her suitcase creaking, her bedroom door slamming. Half an hour later, she came down, said goodbye, and left. He watched out the window as the taxi took her away and felt something inside him break. It was not just a departure. This was another step in her other life, about which he knew too much and too little at the same time. The day passed in a kind of fog. Steve went to work, but couldn't concentrate in the office. The drawings of the bridge lay in front of him, but he saw only her face, her lies. Jack noticed his condition and patted him on the back. "Hey, old man, you're like a zombie again," he said, grinning. "Amanda, is she on a business trip again?" "Yes," Steve muttered, without looking up. Something happened. "She's just like a businesswoman," Jack whistled. "Soon he will drag you to New York." Steve remained silent, but Jack's words cut like a knife. Drag. Or maybe she's already there. Not with him, but with that other one. He opened his mail, hoping to distract himself, but instead of work emails, he saw a new message from Robert Kane. Subject: urgent. His heart began to pound. He clicked. "Keller, she's in New York. I've been following her since the morning. There's big news. She was seen at a clinic in Manhattan, had an ultrasound. She's pregnant. The period is short, 4 or 5 weeks, but I can't say for sure. Who the father is unknown. I'm attaching a photo. What's next?" Steve reread the message 3 times, each word etched into his brain like a shard of glass. Pregnant. Ultrasound. 4 to 5 weeks. He opened the attached files. A photo of Amanda walking out of a building with a sign that said Women's Health Clinic, her face tense but focused. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the air leaving his lungs. 4 to 5 weeks. He tried to remember the last time. It was more than a month ago, before her next trip. They had rarely been close lately, her departures, his fatigue, their cooling marriage. But it could have been his. Or not. David. This politician with whom she is building a different life. 4 or 5 weeks ago, she was in New York. With him. Steve clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, but he felt no pain. Only rage, fear, and something else lost, as if he was falling into an abyss without a bottom. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and left the office without saying a word to Jack. Outside, the wind whipped his face, but he didn't notice. His thoughts were spinning in a chaotic whirlwind. Pregnant. Did she know? Is that why you left so urgently? Or is this an accident that she herself only found out about? And why didn't you tell him? Was he her husband or not anymore? Steve got into the car, started the engine, but didn't drive. I just sat there, looking at the windshield, where the raindrops were making blurry patterns. The phone vibrated. Message from Amanda. Landed. Everything is okay. I'll call you later. He stared at the screen, feeling his anger building into something uncontrollable. She texts him, "It's okay," while sitting in New York with a baby in her belly and doesn't say a word. He wanted to dial her number, shout, "Are you pregnant? From whom?" But instead he threw the phone on the passenger seat and slammed his fist on the steering wheel. The sound of a beep broke the silence, and he froze, breathing heavily. He returned home late. He turned on the light, went into the kitchen, and poured whiskey. The glass trembled in his hand as he raised it to his lips. Pregnant. This word pulsed in my head like an alarm. He opened his laptop and looked at the photo from Kane again. Her face in the picture is so familiar, but now alien. He remembered how she looked in the morning, a little paler than usual, but he chalked it up to fatigue. Now he saw the signs, the slight shadow under her eyes, her sudden movements, her haste. She knew, or she suspected it, and she left to figure it out without him. Steve finished his whiskey and poured more. His mind was racing between two thoughts. Is this his child or David's? He wanted to believe that their marriage could still be saved, that this was a chance to start over. But the other part of him, the one that saw the photo, who knew about the second documents and the engagement, screamed, "You are a fool. This is not yours." He stood up, walked around the room, stopping at their wedding photo on the shelf. They smiled, young, happy, confident. Where is it all now? The phone vibrated again. Amanda called. Steve looked at the screen, feeling his fingers curl into a fist. He didn't want to answer, but picked up the phone and pressed it to his ear. "Hello," her voice was soft, a little tired. "Are you home?" "Yes," he answered briefly, trying not to betray his emotions. "I just arrived at the apartment," she sighed. "It's a complete mess with the client. I'll spend the whole day tomorrow figuring it out." "How are you doing?" "Fine," he lied, clutching the phone until his knuckles turned white. "Tired." "Rest then," she paused, then added, "I'll try to come back as soon as possible." "I miss." "Me too," he said, but the words sounded empty. He hung up, threw the phone on the sofa, and covered his face with his hands. "I miss. She's bored." And he's going crazy. The night was a nightmare. Steve lay on the sofa, unable to get up to the bedroom, where everything reminded him of her. There was no sleep, only fragments of thoughts, images, Amanda in the clinic, her hand on her stomach, David smiling next to her. He stood up, poured more whiskey, and drank it in one gulp. Alcohol did not help, it only increased the rage. He wanted to break something, a glass, a table, that damn photograph on the shelf. But instead he just sat there, staring into space. In the morning he wrote to Kane, "Find out more. Who is the father? When did she find out?" The answer came an hour later. "It's difficult to say for sure. The clinic will not give information without a warrant. But she was there alone. I continue to monitor." Steve clutched the phone, feeling control slipping away. He didn't know what was worse, ignorance or the truth, which could destroy everything. He was like a ghost at work. Jack tried to get him to talk, but Steve waved him off and closed himself in the intercom. He looked at the photo of Amanda from the clinic, zoomed in on her face, looked for answers in her eyes. But there was only tension, only a mask that he could no longer unravel. By lunchtime, he lost his temper, he left the office, got into the car, and drove home, not knowing why. Steve woke up on the couch, where he spent another sleepless night, with an empty bottle of whiskey on the floor and his head buzzing. The last days after Kane's news about Amanda's pregnancy were like a dark tunnel. He walked through it, seeing no way out, only plunging deeper into the chaos of his thoughts. She was in New York for the second day, and her short messages, "Everything is okay, I'm working. I miss you," sounded like a mockery. He couldn't sit and wait any longer. He needed to see everything with his own eyes. Steve stood up, went into the bathroom, and splashed cold water on his face. The mirror reflected a man he barely recognized. Bags under his eyes, stubble, a look full of fatigue, and something else, determination. He could no longer live in this limbo, wondering whose child she was carrying, what she was doing, who she was now. He decided to go to New York, secretly, without her knowledge. He will watch, follow, and look for answers. It was madness, but inaction was killing him faster. He quickly packed his bag, a couple of shirts, jeans, a laptop. I took the phone and dialed Amanda. She answered after the third ring, her voice slightly sleepy. "Hi, honey," she said. "You're early." "Hi," Steve tried to sound natural, although his throat was constricting. "Listen, I have a business trip coming up. To Detroit. We need to go for a couple of days and check out the facility." Oh, unexpectedly, a slight weariness flashed in her tone, but she quickly added, "Well, good luck to you. When are you leaving?" "This afternoon," he lied, looking at the ticket for the flight to New York, which he had already bought online. "I'll probably be back by the weekend." "Okay," she paused, then said, "Call me when you arrive, okay? Don't get lost." "Of course," he nodded, although she couldn't see it. "You too." "I miss you," she added, and Steve squeezed the phone tighter. "Me too," he replied and hung up. The words, "I miss," now sounded like a mockery, but he swallowed it as he had swallowed everything in recent weeks. He called a taxi to O'Hare Airport, threw his bag in the back seat, and remained silent the whole way, looking out the window. His thoughts were confused. What does he want to see? What will he do if the truth turns out to be worse than he thinks? But it was too late to retreat. He should know. The flight to New York took just over 2 hours. Steve landed in LaGuardia late in the afternoon, rented a car, an inconspicuous gray sedan, and immediately texted Kane. "I'm in New York. Where is it?" The answer came 10 minutes later. "The apartment is on East 73rd. There for now. I watched in the morning. I was in the office, then returned home." "To be more precise," Steve replied, "yes, keep me posted." He drove to her house and parked across the street, in the shadow of a tall building overlooking the entrance. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. He felt like a spy from a cheap movie, but it was better than sitting in Chicago and rotting in ignorance. Half an hour later, Kane wrote, "Out, heading to the restaurant on Lexington Avenue, the same one where I was with him earlier." Steve started the car and followed, keeping his distance. The restaurant turned out to be small but cozy, with large windows and soft light inside. Steve parked across the street, took a baseball cap from his bag, and pulled it lower over his eyes. He saw her through the glass. Amanda was sitting at a table by the window, in a dark green dress, with her hair down. Opposite her was him, David Reynolds, tall, with graying dark hair, wearing a shirt with rolled-up sleeves. They laughed, he said something, and she nodded, resting her chin on her hand. Steve gripped the steering wheel, feeling the rage rising from the depths. It didn't work. This was a life he didn't know. He got out of the car, crossed the street, and stopped at the entrance to a nearby cafe, from where he could observe without being noticed. They ate. She ordered a salad, he ordered a steak, and drank wine. Her hand was on the table, and Steve noticed the ring. Not the one he gave her 12 years ago, but another thin one with a small stone. Engagement. His stomach clenched and his breath caught in his throat. She wears his ring here with him and takes it off at home as if nothing had happened. David leaned towards her and whispered something, and Amanda laughed, covering her mouth with her hand. Steve knew this laughter light, sincere, the one he heard at home when they were happy. Now he belonged to someone else. Steve clenched his fists, fighting the urge to rush inside, grab her, and demand an answer. But he restrained himself. He wanted to see more. An hour later, they left the restaurant. David put his arm around her waist and led her to the car, a black sedan with tinted windows. Steve returned to his car and followed, keeping his distance. They stopped at her house on East 73rd. David came out, opened the door for her, and walked her to the entrance. They stood at the entrance, talking. Then he leaned over and kissed her on the cheek, nothing more, but it was enough to make Steve feel sick. She went inside, he left. Steve remained sitting in the car, looking at its windows. The light came on the third floor, and he imagined her there in the apartment where his things, his life were. He spent the night in a cheap motel nearby, unable to sleep. In the morning, I wrote to Amanda. I arrived in Detroit. Everything is okay. How are you? She answered half an hour later, okay, I'm working. I miss you. Steve gritted his teeth and threw the phone on the bed. I miss. How can she write this while spending her evenings with someone else? He called Kane, his voice shaking with anger. She's with him, he said without greeting. I saw them yesterday. What else do you know? Good morning, Kane coughed. She went to the clinic again today. Repeat ultrasound, it seems. I followed, but didn't get inside, there was security. Then to the office, there now. He stopped by for lunch for about 40 minutes. Ultrasound, Steve repeated, feeling the cold creep into his bones. She's pregnant. Are you sure? 90%, Kane replied. I saw her with papers from the clinic, but I don't know who the father is. Where are you? Here, Steve swallowed. I'm watching. Careful, Kane lowered his voice. She's not stupid. If he notices, it will be worse. I know. Steve hung up the phone and collapsed on the bed. Pregnant. Ultrasound. He imagined her in the clinic, smiling, looking at the screen where a small heart was beating. Hi, or David. He didn't know, and it tore him apart. During the day, he watched again. Amanda left the office around 3 and got into a taxi. Steve followed her, keeping his distance. She headed towards the Park Central, to its northern part. David was waiting for her there. They walked holding hands, stopped by the pond, and fed the ducks. Steve watched from afar, hidden behind the trees, clutching the binoculars he had bought that morning. Her hand lay on his elbow, she was telling something, and he was laughing. They looked like a couple happy, real. Steve felt tears sting his eyes, but he blinked them away. He won't let himself break. Not here. They sat down on the bench. David put his arm around her shoulders. Steve saw how she laid her head on his chest, how he stroked her hair. It was intimate, tender, and it killed him. He wanted to come up and shout, but instead, the New York evening was falling over the city in a soft blanket of lights and shadows as Steve sat in his rented sedan parked 2 blocks from Amanda's apartment on East 73rd Street. A day had passed since he had secretly flown here, lying to her about a business trip to Detroit, and all this time he had been living in some kind of feverish state between surveillance, rage, and despair. He saw her with David, their dinners, walks, her smile, which now belonged to someone else. He knew she was pregnant, but he didn't know from whom, and that ignorance was eating away at him like acid. But today, everything was about to change. Today, he got a chance to rip off the masks. In the morning, Kane sent a message. Reynolds is having a meeting this evening. Plaza Hotel, 7 p.m. Public event will introduce his future wife. She will be there. What are you doing? Steve reread the text, feeling the blood rush to his face. Public event. David is going to introduce Amanda as his bride to his business partners, to the press, to the whole world. Amanda Wilson, his future wife. Steve squeezed the phone until the screen flickered, but didn't answer right away. He knew this was his moment. Don't just observe, but act. Expose her. Show the truth. He texted Kane. I'll be there. Keep an eye on her before the start. Need details. The answer came quickly. Okay. She's in the office now. Meet him at 18 o'clock at his house. Then we'll go together. Good luck, Keller. Steve leaned back in his seat, looking at the ceiling of the car. Good luck. He'll need more than luck. He needed iron control to go in there and give everything he knew without losing control. But he was ready, or thought I was ready. During the day, he got ready. I bought a cheap suit from a store nearby, dark gray, slightly wrinkled, but decent enough to not stand out among the guests. I took a baseball cap and sunglasses to remain invisible until the right moment. He hadn't eaten all day. The thought of food made his stomach ache, but he drank coffee to keep himself energized. He had a plan in his head. Enter the meeting, wait for David to introduce Amanda, and then step forward. Tell the truth. Show who she really is. He didn't know what would happen next, the screams, the chaos, her tears, but it didn't matter anymore. He wanted only one thing, for her double life to collapse. By 5 o'clock, he had parked near the Plaza, a stately hotel on Fifth Avenue with golden lights and doormen at the entrance. Kane wrote, "They're on their way. She's in a black dress, he's in a suit. The guests are already gathering in the ballroom." Steve got out of the car, put on his glasses and baseball cap, and put his hands in his pockets. He felt like a stranger in this city, in this situation, but he moved forward, driven by something more than fear. There was a crowd of people at the entrance to the hotel, men in tuxedos, women in evening dresses, journalists with cameras. Steve walked past security, head down, muttering something about guests of the event. They let him through apparently. The pressure of the guests was too great to check everyone. Inside, he took off his glasses, pocketed his baseball cap, and headed toward the ballroom. The hall was huge. Crystal chandeliers, long tables with white tablecloths, the hum of voices, and the clink of glasses. Steve took a position against the wall in the shadow of a pillar where he could see the stage. At 19:15, the hall began to fill. The guests were seated, the waiters served champagne. Steve noticed David's business partners, gray-haired men in expensive suits, with confident smiles, and their wives hung with diamonds. There were also journalists, with notebooks and cameras, ready to catch every word. The presenter appeared on the stage, a young guy in a tuxedo, with a microphone in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, smiling. "Today is a special evening. We are here to support David Reynolds, our distinguished politician and friend, in his new endeavors. And he has an important announcement. Let's welcome him." The audience burst into applause, and David came onto the stage. He looked as usual, tall, confident, with a warm smile and light gray hair. He was wearing a dark suit that fit perfectly, and he carried himself as if he were already mayor. Steve clenched his fists, feeling his pulse beating in his temples. "Thank you, friends," David began, raising his hand to quiet the applause. "I am grateful to each of you for your support. Today is not only about politics. Today is about life. I want to introduce you to a person who has become my support, my inspiration. My future wife, Amanda Wilson." The audience clapped again, and she came out from behind the scenes. Amanda, wearing a knee-length, off-the-shoulder black dress, her hair was styled in soft waves, and there was a smile on her face, the same one that Steve knew, but now saw differently. She took David's hand, stood next to him, and the hall roared with approval. Steve looked at her, and his heart sank. She was beautiful, confident, as if she was born for this stage. But he knew the truth. David continued, "Amanda is not just my fiancée. She is my partner, my ally. Together, we will build the future for me, for her, for our city, and soon, perhaps, for our family." He smiled at her, and she nodded, placing her hand on his shoulder. The audience applauded louder, and someone shouted, "Congratulations!" Steve felt like everything was exploding inside him. Family. She's pregnant, and David talks about family. This was his moment. He stepped forward and pushed through the crowd, not paying attention to the surprised looks. His voice boomed over the noise. "Stop. This is a lie." The hall fell silent, heads turned to him. David frowned, Amanda froze, her smile faltering. Steve walked up onto the stage, feeling his legs shake, but he didn't stop. "I'm Steve Keller," he said, looking at David, then at Amanda, "and I am her legal husband." The silence became deafening. David blinked, his face going pale. Amanda took a step back, her eyes widening, but she quickly pulled herself together. "What nonsense." David stepped towards him. His voice was firm, but there was a flash of confusion in it. "Who are you?" "Her husband," Steve repeated, turning to Amanda. 12 years of marriage. Chicago. Our home is in Oak Park. You live with her here, but she is my wife. Amanda Keller, not Wilson. The hall began to buzz, journalists raised their cameras, and guests began to whisper. David looked at Amanda, his gaze demanding an answer. Amanda, what does this mean? He asked, lowering his voice, but the microphone still picked up the words. She opened her mouth, but Steve didn't let her speak. She lives a double life, he continued, looking at the crowd. She's my wife in Chicago. Here is your bride. She has two sets of documents, Amanda Keller and Amanda Wilson. She's pregnant, and I don't know whether it's from me or from you. But I'm her husband. Law. David stepped back, his face stony. Amanda stepped toward Steve, her eyes sparkling. Steve, what are you doing? She hissed, but her voice was shaking. This is not the place. Not the place? He turned to her, his voice breaking. You're standing here with a ring from him, and I'm your husband. You lied to me, you lied to him, you lied to everyone. How much longer were you going to play? The crowd booed louder, and the cameras started clicking. David grabbed her hand and pulled her aside. This is true? He asked, his voice low, almost menacing. Are you married? Amanda looked at him, then at Steve. Her face paled, but she straightened up, trying to maintain control. Yes, she finally said, quietly but firmly. I'm married, but it's not what you think, David. I can explain. Explain? David let go of her hand. His eyes darkened. You said you were free. You are wearing my ring. We were planning a wedding. She hesitated, her gaze flicking to Steve. It's complicated. Difficult. Steve stepped towards her, his voice trembling with anger. You're pregnant, Amanda. Did you tell him? Or me? Who is the father? She froze, her lips trembled. The audience held its breath, waiting for an answer. David looked at her, his face a mixture of shock and rage. Are you pregnant? He asked, and there was pain in his voice. And you didn't tell me. I just found out. She raised her hands as if in defense. I was going to tell you. Both. I just didn't know how. Steve chuckled, but it was a bitter laugh. I didn't know how, he repeated. You lived with both of us. You lied to both of us. You chose him and left me a fool. That's not true. She stepped towards him, but he retreated. Steve, I didn't choose. I'm confused. I'm confused. David shook his head, his voice becoming cold. You lied to me from the very beginning. I thought you were mine, but you are someone's wife. The crowd buzzed even louder, and journalists began shouting questions. Security moved toward the stage, but Steve raised his hand. I'm leaving, he said, looking at Amanda. But now everyone knows who you are. Live with it. He turned and walked away, making his way through the crowd. Her voice, Steve, wait, echoed behind him, but he didn't stop. David stood on the stage, looking after her, his face a mask of shock. The hall was buzzing like a beehive, but Steve didn't care. He went outside and breathed in the cold air, feeling tears burning his eyes. The masks have been torn off. The truth has come out. But it didn't make it any easier for him. The New York night, after the masks came off at the Plaza Ballroom, turned into chaos that David Reynolds could not have foreseen. The hall, which had recently been filled with applause and the clinking of glasses, was now buzzing like an agitated beehive. The guests' business partners, sponsors, journalists whispered, pointed fingers, and filmed on their phones. The scene where Amanda had just stood smiling next to David was now the epicenter of the storm. Steve left, leaving behind a trail of truth that shattered the illusion of the perfect couple, and David was left alone in front of the crowd, his face a mixture of shock, anger, and confusion. Amanda stood to the side, her black dress wrinkled, her hands trembling as she tried to say something, but the words were drowned in the hum of voices. David looked at her, his eyes narrowed, but he didn't have time to ask another question. The journalists had already rushed to the stage, like a pack of hungry wolves sensing prey. The cameras clicked, the microphones extended forward, and questions rained down. Mr. Reynolds, is it true that your fiancé is married? Shouted a young guy with the New York Post logo on his badge. Did you know about her double life? The woman with the tablet picked up, her voice cutting through the air. How will this affect your campaign? Someone shouted from the crowd. David raised his hand, trying to take control of the situation, but his voice trembled, betraying internal discord. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, trying to sound confident, this is a misunderstanding. I'll figure it out. Give me time. Misunderstanding. A journalist with a thick beard interrupted him. Her husband just accused you of having an affair with a married woman. This is true? The crowd began to roar louder. Guests began to rise from their seats. Some headed towards the exit. Others filmed what was happening. David felt sweat running down his temple, despite the coolness of the room. He glanced at Amanda. She stood with her head down, her face as pale as chalk. Her silence was more eloquent than any words, and this only added fuel to the fire. I didn't know, he finally said, turning to the reporters. If this is true, I'm just as shocked as you are. I'll figure it out. But his words were drowned in a new barrage of questions. The hotel security tried to push the press away, but it was too late. The story had already broken out. David retreated backstage, grabbing Amanda's elbow. We need to leave, he hissed, his voice low and angry. Now. She nodded without looking at him, and they disappeared behind the curtain, leaving the hall in chaos. But the journalists were not going to give up some rush to the exit to intercept them in the car. Others were already knocking on their phones, sending the first headlines to the editors. In the morning, New York woke up to screaming headlines. The New York Post released a special edition. Politician trapped in lies. Reynolds' fiancée turns out to be married. The Daily News was even harsher. Plaza scandal. Fiancé's double life destroys David Reynolds' career. Social media exploded, with video of the event taken by guests going viral across X with the hashtags #ReynoldsScandal and #DoubleLife. Users posted memes, David with horns, Amanda with 2 rings, Steve as an Avenger hero. The reputation that David had been building for years, an honest, straightforward politician, a fighter for justice, began to come apart at the seams. His team gathered in the Brooklyn office before dawn. Tony, the lanky assistant, was rushing around the room, waving a clipboard. This is a disaster, boss, he said, pointing at the screen. The Post is already writing that you knew and covered for her. Sponsors call every 5 minutes. 2 declined funding. David sat at the table, his face gray as ash. He didn't sleep all night after escaping from the plaza. He took Amanda to her apartment and demanded an explanation, but she was silent, only repeating, I need time. He left, slamming the door, and now sat here, trying to understand how his life collapsed in a few hours. I didn't know, he said quietly, looking into space. She said she was free. I believed her. It doesn't matter, Tony shook his head. People see the headlines, not the truth. You are being made out to be either a fool or a liar. Either way is the end of the campaign. The rest of the team were silent, but their faces said it all. Fear, disappointment, confusion. David got up and walked to the window, looking at the morning Brooklyn. He built his career on openness, on the promise of being a man of the people. Now this image has been crushed. By noon, the scandal had grown. TV channels picked up the story. CNN played a video of Steve screaming on stage, and MSNBC invited experts to discuss Reynolds' moral character. One of the donors, a prominent Manhattan businessman, publicly stated, I can't support someone whose personal life is such a mess. Others followed him, withdrawing checks and promises. David's reputation, his political capital, was melting before our eyes. By evening, journalists had unearthed more. Someone leaked information about Amanda's pregnancy. Rumors from the clinic reached the press, and the headlines became even louder. Reynolds and a secret child. What is the politician hiding? David sat in the office, listening to Tony read out another post in X. If he didn't know about the husband, then what about the child? Does this guy even know who he lives with? The team tried to formulate a statement, but every word sounded either like an excuse or a lie. We need to come out and tell the truth, David said finally, his voice hoarse with fatigue. I didn't know. She deceived me. I am a victim, not a culprit. This won't work. Tony shook his head. People don't like victims. They want strong leaders. And now you look weak. David clenched his fists, but remained silent. He knew Tony was right. His image as a confident, infallible politician was destroyed. Even if he proves that he did not know about Amanda's marriage, this will not restore trust. The scandal became too loud, too personal. By nightfall, his phone was ringing with calls colleagues from the city council, friends, reporters. He didn't answer. One of the partners, an old friend from university, wrote, "David, this is the end. Come out with a statement before it's too late." But David didn't know what to say. He lost not only his reputation, but also his faith in himself. Amanda, whom he considered his muse, his other half, turned out to be a mirage. The next day, a press conference became inevitable. David stood in front of the cameras in his office, wearing a wrinkled suit and dark circles under his eyes. The hall was packed with journalists. Their questions sounded like gunshots. "I was deceived," he began, looking into the lens. "I didn't know about Amanda's marriage. She hid it from me as she did from all of you. I'm shocked and disappointed. My goal is to serve the city, and I will continue to do so despite personal challenges." But his words were drowned in a new barrage of questions. "Have you checked her background? How could you not know? Will you leave the campaign?" He finished his speech and walked away under the camera flashes, but knew that this was not salvation. The scandal has already taken root. His rating in the polls fell from 45% to 20% within 24 hours. Sponsors left, the team whispered behind his back. David Reynolds, a rising political star, has become a laughingstock. New York was left behind like a trail of smoke from a departing train as Steve boarded the flight back to Chicago. The morning sky over LaGuardia was clear, but he did not notice its beauty. His gaze was empty, directed somewhere inside himself. A day has passed since he tore off his mask in the Plaza Ballroom, exposing Amanda's double life to David, the journalists, and the whole world. The scandal was already making headlines, but Steve didn't care. He had done what he had to do, and now he was returning home not to the life that had been before, but to the new one that he had to build from the rubble. The decision to file for divorce came to him at night after the scene in the hotel. He did not sleep, sitting in the motel with a bottle of water in his hands. The whiskey no longer got into his throat. His mind was clearer than ever. He could not live with her any longer. Not after everything he saw, learned, felt. She had been his wife for 12 years, but now he saw that Amanda, the one who shared his house, bed, dreams, had long disappeared into her other life. He didn't know when it started, but he knew it was the end. In the morning, he called a lawyer in Chicago, his old friend Mark Davis, and asked him to prepare papers. "Divorce?" Mark asked again, his voice surprised but restrained. "Are you sure, Steve?" "Yes," he answered, looking out the window at the great wall of the motel. "Absolutely. It's a long story. Just do it quickly." "Okay," Mark coughed. "Come and sign the documents. Will you divide the property?" "Let him take what he wants," Steve smiled bitterly. "I don't need anything from her." He hung up, packed his bag, and went to the airport. Before the flight, he wrote to Amanda, "I'm filing for divorce. It's over." There was no answer, and he didn't expect one. She was probably still recovering from the chaos in New York, but he didn't care. He cut her out of his life, or tried to. The plane landed at O'Hare by noon. Steve took a taxi and went home to Oak Park. The road was painfully familiar: suburban streets, trees with young leaves, children on bicycles. But now it all seemed alien, like the scenery for a play that had ended. He entered the house and threw his bag at the door. Silence greeted him like an old friend. No footsteps from Amanda, no voice from her humming in the kitchen. Just the smell of cold coffee and emptiness. He walked into the living room and sat on the couch, looking at their wedding photo on the shelf. Her smile in the photo now seemed fake, like the mask she had worn for years. He stood up, took off the frame, opened the desk drawer, and stuck it there without looking. It was the first thing he removed, but not the last. He knew that the house needed to be cleared of her things, her presence, her lies. But that could wait. For now, he just wanted to breathe. The phone vibrated, a message from Mark. "The papers are ready. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the office. Come." Steve nodded to himself, feeling strangely relieved. The divorce was not just a legal step, it was a breaking of the chains that held him captive to her deceit. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in months he felt like he could move forward. Meanwhile, in New York, Amanda sat in her apartment on East 73rd Street, surrounded by a silence that was more oppressive than any noise. Her life fell apart overnight, and she didn't know how to pick up the pieces. After the scene in the plaza, David left without saying a word, only giving her a cold look full of contempt. In the morning, he called a short, sharp conversation that she would remember forever. "You ruined everything," he said, his voice like ice. "I trusted you. And you. You're not even human, Amanda. You are a fraud. It's over." "David, I can explain," she began, but he interrupted. "No need. I don't want to hear. You're married, pregnant, and I don't even know from whom. Do you think I'll stay after this? My career is in ruins because of you. Goodbye." He hung up and Amanda was left alone, looking at the phone. She knew he was right. The scandal had destroyed his reputation, and she was the reason. The newspaper headlines screamed about the double life of the bride, about the fall of Reynolds, and each of them was a knife in her heart. She lost him, the man who looked at her with admiration, who called her his other half. But something else was worse, a message from Steve that arrived an hour ago. "I'm filing for divorce. It's over." She reread his words, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. Steve, her anchor, her home, her reliability, was also gone. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself, and for the first time in months, she realized that she was left with nothing. The two lives she had so skillfully juggled collapsed, leaving her in emptiness. David had abandoned her, Steve had abandoned her, and even the child she was carrying now seemed foreign, a symbol of chaos rather than hope. Amanda stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over Manhattan. Her apartment, her sanctuary, was now just a box full of things that no longer meant anything. David's jacket in the closet, her dresses, the second toothbrush, all this was part of the game that she lost. She didn't know who the child's father was, and that scared her the most. She could do a test, find out, but then what? Steve won't come back, David won't forgive. She was left alone, and the thought was unbearable. Steve signed the divorce papers the next morning. Mark's office was small but cozy, with the smell of old paper and coffee. Mark placed the documents and a pen in front of him, and Steve, without hesitation, signed. His hand did not tremble. He was calm, as if he was unloading a heavy load. "Sure?" Mark asked, looking at him over his glasses. "Yes," Steve nodded. "This is the end. We'll send her a notification." Mark put the papers in a folder. "If she wants to challenge, there will be a trial. But you said that you don't share the property? Let him take what he wants." Steve shrugged. "House, car, I don't care. I'll start again." Mark nodded without arguing. Steve left the office and breathed in the cold Chicago air. For the first time in months, he felt light. Yes, she betrayed him. Yes, she ruined their marriage. But now he was free, not from love, which still simmered somewhere deep, but from its lies, from its games, from its shadows. He returned home and began putting her things away. Her clothes, books, cosmetics, he put everything in boxes without looking. It wasn't painful, as he expected, but liberating. He opened the windows, let in fresh air, and carried the boxes into the garage. The house became emptier, but cleaner, as if it was erasing her presence layer by layer. In the evening, he sat in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, looking at the sunset outside the window. Relief came quietly, like a tide, washing away the remnants of anger and pain. Amanda received her divorce notice 2 days later. She sat in her apartment, looking at the papers delivered by the courier. Her signature was required, but she couldn't bring herself to pick up the pen. Steve was serious. He didn't bluff or threaten. He was leaving forever. She called him, but he didn't answer. She wrote, "Steve, let's talk," but the message went unanswered. She knew that she had lost him, just as she had lost David, and this emptiness was her punishment. David didn't call again. His career was falling apart, his sponsors left, his rating dropped to 0, his team fled. He released another statement blaming Amanda for everything, but it didn't help. His name became synonymous with scandal, and he faded into the shadows, leaving her alone to blame herself. Amanda remained in New York, but without both lives. Her job hung in the balance. The company did not want to be associated with a scandal. Her colleagues were whispering behind her back. She sat in an empty apartment, looking at the city that had once been her dream, and realized that she had lost everything. The baby in her belly was the only thing she had left, but even he couldn't fill the void. Steve started a new life in Chicago. He sold the house Too Many Memories and bought a small apartment in the center, closer to work. Jack helped him move, patting him on the shoulder and joking. "Well, bachelor, freedom now." Steve smiled, but didn't argue. Freedom was bitter, but real. He went to work, built bridges, and drank beer with friends in the evenings. The pain of betrayal did not go away, but became quieter, like an old scar. He didn't hate Amanda, he pitied her, but didn't want to see her. The divorce was completed a month later, quietly, without trials. She took half of their savings. He left her the house. He didn't care. One evening, he stood at the window of his new apartment, looking at the lights of the city. The relief was complete, not that he had won, but that he had survived. She destroyed their marriage, but not him. He was free, and that was the beginning. The end of her game and his new chapter. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.